Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today I'm very pleased to have Gerry McGovern with us. Gerry has published 8 books. His latest, Worldwide Waste, examines the impact digital is having on the environment. He developed Top Tasks, a research method which helps identify what truly matters to people. The Irish Times has described Gerry as one of the 5 visionaries who have had a major impact on the development of the web. Gerry, it's so great to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Stephan.
Let's talk about, first of all, your impetus for writing a book, not about technology and leveraging it and so forth from the perspective of more productivity and more reach and more value and so forth, but from a environmental impact standpoint and from a more kind of awareness standpoint. I think that's really, really cool. What drove you to do that?
Well, a number of years ago, the youth movement was starting, or, Greta Thunberg and, millions of young people basically getting out and marching for the environment to save the planet, so to speak. And I thought, oh, that's an idealistic thing to do. That's a positive thing to do. And I looked at my own career and I thought, oh, I'm lucky. I work in digital and, it's inherently green. And I thought, lucky I'm not working in another area. It's all really positive over here, because that's a kind of what I wrote my first major report back in 1996 for the Irish government, called Ireland, the Digital Age of the Internet, and about how the country should embrace the possibilities. So I very much felt that, for most of my career, that digital was an inherently, don't print this email type, or don't print this out, or, email is vastly better than, than sending a print or a brochure, stuff like that. But I said, maybe I'll have a look and see, is there anything, about digital that isn't so green, that maybe has some, darker, more negative sides. And that became the impetus for research, and that evolved into the book. And that the more I looked at digital, or the more I dug into digital and modern technology, the more I began to realize that digital is actually the accelerant of the climate crisis, and that modern technology, we couldn't have the climate crisis without technology. Basically, back in 1750, the first CO2 analysis for a country was in the UK. It was essentially the first industrial nation, and it was industrialization. If we had no mechanical, digital tools, technological tools, we wouldn't be polluting to the extent that we're polluting. So, and in the 70s, with the massive uptake of, like, humans, in the last 50 years have done more damage to the planet than in the previous 3 million. So it's not like we've been gradually doing damage over millions of years. We hardly had a major impact before the 1800s or whatever. But since 50% of our CO2 has been emitted, human-based CO2, since 1995. So of all the CO2 that we're responsible for, and I began to wonder, well, doesn't that map with the growth of the internet and the growth of computers? And what I began to realize is that digital accelerates a great number of wasteful type of behaviors, that we've never created more waste. It has really created a very disposable culture and a very disposable mentality and way of living. So this was a huge shock for me, because this was not what I was expecting to find. I was expecting, oh, maybe there's a few little changes here and there in our beautiful digital world because digital is better. But I began to see that digital is a tool that drives often some of the worst human behaviors.
Yeah, and one of the examples of environmental impact from digital is the energy consumption required by Bitcoin. And in fact, that was, I think, one of the reasons that Elon Musk gave for no longer taking Bitcoin as payment for Tesla automobiles. And yet he's still a proponent of Dogecoin, so he's not completely poo-pooing all cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin in particular is quite egregious, apparently, in terms of its energy consumption.
Absolutely. I mean, the model of Bitcoin is the more for it to become more valuable, it must consume more energy. So and blockchain and all the, like, a blockchain transaction is 500,000 times more energy intensive than a Visa transaction. So we create, what I realized as I talked to or dealt with technologists is that the vast majority of technologists have no care or concern of the energy that they are responsible for consuming, or the pollution that they are involved in creating. And most of it, the bigger background discovery was that most of the pollution occurs in the device, not in the use of the device. So one of these, an ordinary server, forget about a Bitcoin server, would be massively more processing intensive. But a typical bog standard server from Dell or whatever will be responsible for at least 1 ton of CO2 in its manufacture.
Wow.
And that server will probably be kept, if it's bought by a data center, which a lot of them are bought by now, a big cloud data center, will probably be kept for 3 years. And after 3 years, many of those servers will be trashed. They won't be traded in, or they'll be trashed for security reasons and data protection reasons. So we've got in digital, we're creating 50 million tons of e-waste a year. Much less than 20% of it is recycled. And we have a branding, marketing culture of changing our technology every 2 or 3 years. So we deliberately, planned obsolescence it's not, planned obsolescence was like building castles in the 50s. Like, it was, planned obsolescence in the 50s is nothing to what planned obsolescence is today. Like, when we were doing planned obsolescence in the 50s and 60s, we were expecting products to last 10 or 15 years or 20 years or so. Now we expect them to last 2 or 3 years. So when you combine a very intense pollution, like there's 1,000 materials in a particular smartphone. The electronics are very intense, very material intense, and very energy intense in their manufacture. So a lot of the pollution occurs at manufacture. So when you combine that with a very short life cycle and then very low recycling, you get this waste mountain. You get, 50 million tons a year at the moment. Like, the entire commercial aircraft ever built is 40 million tons. And why don't we see this? So you're saying, well, I don't see it around. Well, we dump most of it back in global South countries. We dump it in Ghana. We ship it to places where there's something like 18 million children and 10 million women, children as young as 5 years old, trying to pull out little pieces of copper and gold out of circuits because their fingers are small. It being burned in open pits. This is the so-called recycling that's occurring for most of our electronics products. So we've got products that we design deliberately to fail, and that cannot be repaired, and that cannot be recycled. And, we wonder why we're destroying life on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So somebody who's listening to this thinking, well, this sounds really dire and terrible, and I like listening to good news only, so I'm about ready to hit next on my podcast listening. What do you tell that person? Because I think you were unaware of this until recently, until you worked on the book, and so you didn't have a passion to save the planet in that way. You were just adding value and coming up with really great frameworks and models for things like workflow and
Absolutely. It was not my area at all. But I think, Stephan, at a certain point, maybe we have to get a bit older, you begin to wonder, why are we here? And, is it just to make money? Is that it? Is that, is that what our life amounts to, just to make as much money as we can? You've got children, I've got children. Began to think, well, am I part of something that will result in them not having a life, or certainly their children not having a planet that's livable? So I kind of, it's impossible to ignore the climate crisis at the moment. Maybe there's a bunch of people who want to, still think that humans are not responsible, or humans don't really, etc. But I think the evidence is building in a very substantive way, and you're thinking, what can I do that can actually make some difference? Because it is this huge kind of sense of individual irresponsibility, that I've no response, that I'm only one person. That's the classic cop-out, that nothing I do matters. Well, that's why we're in the state that we're in, because too many people just want good news stories and just want happy, clappy stuff. While there is a crisis, while there is, the future for our children, and certainly their children, is seriously in doubt. Like, I read an article yesterday. I don't know if do you remember? I remember, 20 years ago, I never paid it any attention, but hearing about the Club of Rome. Did you ever hear of them?
No.
Well, there was a famous book. Well, it was famous in the 70s. It sold millions of copies, called The Limits to Growth. And it was brought out by a bunch of economists and ecologists, and called the Club of Rome. And it was published in 72, and there was huge debates and issues, but they lost the debate. Even the book became really popular. And they predicted that by the middle of this century, we would have a civilizational collapse because of the way we were consuming raw material. If we kept consuming raw materials at the pace we were consuming raw materials and other materials, we would have a civilizational collapse by 2050. This is what was predicted in 1972. And I just read an article yesterday by KPMG, not exactly radicals, right? The accounting firm KPMG, one of the senior analysts in KPMG, that decided to do analysis of their figures and see how did they track between 1972 and 1920 and 2020, where we are. Were they predicting the numbers of actual extraction of materials, etc., around the world? And they said, yeah, they're pretty much spot on. The figures are pretty much, give or take a little bit, So it's not just we consume too much, and we create so much waste. Like 40% of food is not used. And like we know, like you see, 75% of insects are extinct in most countries. 67% of Irish birds have disappeared in the last 25 years. It's not simply just, we are doing something really bad to this planet, and we don't have to do it. We don't have to do it. If we reduce, and that's why the book is called Worldwide Waste. If we reduce the waste, if we really focus on where there's waste, we could live a great life. We could have lots of, nice things, etc. Even better things as well. Like, we're beginning to, notice that, hey, slow food movement, etc. That actually we're lazy. We drive quite a distance to an organic market every 2 or 3 weeks. It's a fair distance, and in between we get produce from the supermarkets, the nearest supermarkets. And I'm not, I was never into this in a big way, and I'm not a great person to taste. But let me tell you, and I don't know if you found it yourself, if you get really fresh, organic vegetables or greens, they taste better than the stuff you get in the supermarket. You actually enjoy your food more. Like we can have a good life, but consume far less. And I think we need a massive change. I know I studied marketing, but marketing has been the spear point of all this consumption. And I think I'm saying that if there's two people left listening, maybe they're the two that will say, we need a new way of thinking about the world and thinking about that. How do we make it cool to repair? How do we, market reuse? How do we make it fashionable, to hold on to things? To have something, that this is 20 years old. The sense of, imagine, Stephan, if you got a child that's 4 or 5 years old and you're walking down the road and a neighbour stops you and says, how old is your child? 5. Do you not think of replacing her? What other world is 2 or 3 old? It doesn't exist. Yet we've gone into this frenzy of consumption and replacement, and it's breaking the planet.
Yeah. One of my clients is Otherworld Computing, and they are all about improving the environment and low impact and upgrading older computers instead of dumping them and buying a new one. Yeah, so you can get memory from them for a good price. You can get larger hard drives and take a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old MacBook and make it run as fast almost as a brand new one.
Yeah. We need to do this. We need to scale this, and there's a big wave going around the world now, right to repair. So President Biden and the FTC and there's laws coming in Australia and the UK and the European Union. So there is a awareness, and let's hope the momentum builds, because we can get the job done without being nearly as wasteful or as destructive as we have been.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things we can do as a marketer to impact not just our own personal sphere of influence and our family, but also impact others' ability to and desire to make a difference in terms of reducing their footprint as well, because as marketers, we have a great deal of reach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, making people conscious. Let's say if we're dealing initially organizationally, in organizational behavior. So I was just looking at a discussion today with somebody, because I've become really obsessed. My core area really has been website and website design and page design over the years and stuff like that. And we were making a decision today with one developer, and I was looking, I was saying there was 2 fonts, and choosing basically they looked slightly bit different. One was wider than the other, but essentially one of them was 50 kb heavier than the other. And I was showing them to see, does anybody notice any difference in that? Is there any? Well, why would we choose the heavier one then? Why would we? There's so much in an average web page now is about 4 megabyte, right? That page can be absolutely brilliant and do everything it needs to do with 400 kilobytes. So it can be at least 90% smaller. There is so much waste in, either one of the first things you look at is how you're optimizing your images. poor image optimization. But we looked at and I thought I was doing a decent job, but until I, got this real focus, and we looked at some pages I was running, and they'd 300 kilobyte of CSS, and when we really looked into it, the CSS, which is the layout, structure, helps you lay out text in the page. Once we had figured out the CSS we needed, we only had 10 KB. So we went from 300 to 10 KB. Often your analytics, a lot of times you don't need the analytics. Like I've sat in so many meetings over the years of pointlessly talking about analytics. In a lot of environments, analytics is just a pointless conversation. Analytics are very intensive in weight and down. So everything that weighs something creates pollution. Everything that weighs has a certain amount of pollution as it's transferred over the pipes or etc. So JavaScript is particularly intense because it's not just about the transfer to JavaScript, it's the processing that occurs when the JavaScript gets downloaded. So JavaScript, and so a lot of times if you look at a mature page, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff in the code, maybe for old campaigns that are no longer even up and running, but they're still downloading the JavaScript because we never clean up afterwards. So we're still downloading all that JavaScript, except I came across a site there a couple of days ago, which has a piece of code to change the year once a year, right? So it's written a piece of code to go from 2021 to 2022. Every time that page is downloaded, it's downloading that code every other minute of every other day throughout the year. It's only used for 2 seconds in a year, right? And that piece of code in every download takes up 1/3 of a second. So now I used to think user experience. Yeah, I think if we can frame the Earth experience, what's the cost? We start thinking, we've begun to think so narrow as people. We only see our world or the world. We got to see the impact of this. Like when you buy a plastic bottle, you're making 1,000-year decision for the Earth. My wife says to me, we're energy savers. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting phrase. We humans, we're energy savers. We're always trying to save ourselves energy. So plastic bottle, a glass bottle, you'd have to bring it back. We're always making decisions to make life easier in the short term. But a lot of those decisions of convenience and decisions that save us energy have a major cost to the planet. The planet cannot take the way we're living right now. And particularly, countries like the US are responsible for about 40% of the CO2. Imagine if the rest of the world actually lived like the US. Well, the world would just blow up. So the vast majority of the pollution is not by the billions of poor people. 10%, the richest 10% create 50% of the CO2 on the planet by massive abuse of overconsumption. So if we can look and think about waste, whether, I saw a study there recently that published on The Conversation that said in online selling, they tracked something like 20,000 online selling where somebody is selling a product online in a pitch, and they found that people smiling sold less, that the serious people actually sold more. But we are, brought up with all these things that you must have this and you must have that, and as you ramp up in the process, you must have big images, you must have etc. If we're always looking, what is the least impactful way we can do this? And I think, as you know as well, in search engine optimization, that's often good and better for, it's a faster downloading, it's a slimmer, in a lot of situations, that's what the customer wants as well. So I think bringing into our consciousness waste whether, we've taken 200 photos. Do we need, like, how many photos we take every year? Would you have
I have
as a
no
global
idea. No idea.
1.4 trillion?
Wow.
We took more photos last year than in the entire 20th century. And you know what? The vast majority of 90% of data that goes into the cloud is not accessed 3 months after. So these big cloud, great marketing, isn't it great? The cloud's on the ground. This.
It's not all fluffy, is it?
Well, it's not all fluffy, and of course they all go and they say in the data centers, oh, our electricity, we become much more efficient, and they have. There's no doubt about it. But electricity use is less than 10% of the carbon and pollution impact of a data center. Most of the impact is in their materials, their servers. In a typical data center, the electromechanical infrastructure, right, which is the air conditioning systems, cooling systems, etc., are changed every 15 years. That exact same equipment in a factory will last 40 years. So data centers are incredibly, abusive of raw materials. Yet they have this beautiful picture of, it has no cost. And of course, they have a big water footprint. They use huge amounts of water, and that water cannot be reused because it gets all sorts of materials in it as it goes through the cooling systems. So we can make decisions of, cleaning up our database. We got 15,000 people we're sending out. Could we clean that? Maybe 8,000 are just never going to get that or have signed off or whatever. So why are we sending out that extra? Because we don't do that stuff. Every time we would do that, we do something positive. Every time we clean up, every time we reduce waste, there is as much waste in digital or more. I mean, there's actually a job function now for photographic mentors or people who people hire to go through their photos because they're overwhelmed by them. What's the point in taking photos when you get overwhelmed by the quantity you've taken? What is the point of this? Like, don't we want good memories, not 25,000 photos? Like, you can't have good memories if you've got 25,000 photos. So my wife loves taking photos, and we have lots of conversations around. She's a pretty good photographer, but now she's got into a discipline. So we're on for the last couple of weeks, and she's Brazilian. So we're driving around Ireland and old castles and lots of and she's taking all the photos. But in the car on the way back, she was deleting. She didn't do that before. Maybe every year or two, she'd go, "Oh my God, I better clean up all this stuff." But deleting as close to the point of taking as possible, or deciding what not to take or what not to do, in the process. But cleaning up after ourselves has a real impact, and encouraging, products and ways of creating less waste. If we could turn the undoubted abilities of communication, away from consumption. And I know I probably have one person left listening now. My God, you can't get rid of consumption, but we can't keep consuming, Stephan. We can't keep this model is not working. This model is not. We cannot scale this into the future. And this is not from somebody. This is from somebody who's been involved and But just look around. Look at the economics of it, the quantity of we're extracting, et cetera, the collapse in the biosystems. uh, everything is collapsing. The only thing is growing is data and junk. So we need a radical societal, cultural, really rethinking of, what it is to live a good life and what it is, the concepts of growth. Why do we always have to grow? Why can't we maintain? Why do we never? I mean, loads of people have got in touch with gardening, and in since the lockdown and stuff like that. There's a lot of positive things occurring with maintaining and helping stuff, and and cleaning up stuff, and and repairing and fixing, and and making do with stuff. How we can change the marketing model, I really don't know. So oftentimes I'm cynical, because I think it's so much easier to get people to consume than to get people to really care, and it's going to be a real challenge. But if marketing changes, we have a chance. If marketing doesn't change, it's going to be a real struggle.
Yeah. Well, I do think there is a mass consciousness shift happening right now, so I'm very hopeful. And let me just give a framework or an idea that I learned from Ephraim Olszewski, who was a guest on this podcast and on my other show on Get Yourself Optimized, that this made such an impact on me. He explained in a workshop I attended what it was to be cause in the matter, to be responsible, response-able, and to not do it out of duty or obligation or because you don't want to be blamed or because you want credit, but to do it because if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? And that epiphany happened for me at this workshop, which was in a hotel. I went to the restroom during a break, and the soap dispenser was out. There was no more soap. Previous version of me would have been like, okay, that's really annoying, and I would have figured out a way to wash my hands some other way. I mean, I did manage to squeeze out a tiny bit of soap out of it to wash my hands, and that would have been the end of it. But because I had just heard this in the workshop from Ephraim, I'm like, well, I should find the house phone, call housekeeping, and let them know that the soap is out in this particular restroom. And I did. And that was a behavior change, one that I decided to take on as not just a one-off, but a part of my identity, that I'm going to be cause in the matter from now on. And so an example of that, I was at a holy site in Israel a few months ago, and it's up a mountain. So it's a bit of a hike to get up there, and there's a famous holy person's grave there, and there was trash everywhere, and I found that quite appalling. But rather than just leave in a huff, all disgusted at humanity for its lack of accountability and awareness, I found a trash bag that was there, big one, and I filled it. I went and picked up a ton of trash. It took me, 20 minutes. I filled that garbage bag, and then I left after doing my prayers.
It reminds. No, that's great behavior. We were in this ancient room of an old abbey in Ireland there last week, and the exact same scene. I mean, it wasn't covered in trash, but there was a lot of bottles and plastic bottles and stuff like that, and but it wasn't me. It was my wife. She just says, "Hold on, this is terrible." And so when we were leaving, she just went around and and there was a bin. It was across a field. You had to go across it. It was in a farm. It was this ancient room in the middle of a farm with cows and everything around. But at the gate, where we came in, there was a bin. So she got a big, in her hands and brought it and put it into the actual bin. And that's, I mean, we need organizational change. We need government policy. We got things like right to repair, but we also need individual responsibility. That you mentioned from effort. It's a triumvirate. We can't wait and say, oh, we have to wait the government to bring in the law or whatever. Yeah, that needs to happen. Organizations need to, design products that are recyclable but I kind of, it's all a dance in a way, because I've known a lot of politicians over the years, in Ireland in particular, and they're constantly watching the public. And if the public is not talking about the issues, the politician will, be very wary about pushing. They're not leaders. Most people are followers. They just don't let you know they're followers, in the process. And so it's this, we know the theories of 3 or 5% can change a society or world. It's, theories of how movements, how societies change. It doesn't require 50%. A dedicated 3% in a society is extremely powerful. This sense of us making these decisions to pick up the trash, to not allow the trash to fall in the first place. And of course, when other people, see, the thing is as well, Stephan, when other people come to that holy site, they'll be less likely to throw the trash down because there won't be trash. Yeah. That's psychological studies about that as well. If they've seen a totally clean site, they don't want to be the first to throw a bottle of Coke. But if there's loads of bottle of Cokes on the ground, sure, what's another? So it's all of these decisions. And I think this consciousness that we begin to conserve and we need this new model of thinking, and it begins with individuals and with organizations and with governments. But we all need to be in a dance together. We can do this, but will we do it? Well, I'm certainly going to do everything possible I can do. I'm designing this thing at the moment to analyze a web page and its CO2. So what's the biggest thing? Is it the images? Is it the CSS? And what's the hierarchy? And what's the code on the page that's not being used? So that you could look at a page and say, well, here's all the components on the page, from the text to the fonts. Here's how much weight they are. Here's their estimated CO2 emissions if they're downloaded blah blah times, and etc. So that you can get a sense of, well, what's the element of the page that's causing the most weight, and do we need it? Mm-hmm. That you can make an evaluate. So if we are to bring that down to a 1 second download, we'd have to get rid of these 7 things. Trying to look at, mapping, at least in the digital realm, mapping waste in every area. Because if we can take out the waste, we can really do a lot. We won't solve everything, but getting rid of food waste. South Korea was one of the most significant creators of food waste 20 years ago. Today, they create practically the least food waste in a country in the world. So countries can change, cultures can change, but local, often, having stuff grown locally creates less waste. But it's not necessarily true, because if you have, say, beef, even if your beef is local, because beef creates so much energy and so much CO2 in its production, it's not necessarily bad. So we need to be clever it's not always local is better. It depends what you're eating, etc. But if we can constantly be thinking about these things, about the waste we are creating, I think we can, change the cultural focus on consumption.
Yeah. It made me think about how there are these different kinds of validators on websites. Like there's a W3C validated kind of checkmark thing, or there's a trustee verified or whatever. There's ADA compliant, American with Disabilities Act compliant logo and so forth too. I think there should be an environmentally conscious or low impact or small footprint sort of icon or logo that people can put on their websites too after they've done this process of reducing some of the unnecessary weight in their pages.
That's a great idea, and yeah, I'm sure someone is thinking about that, or hopefully some larger organization, or NGO type organization, or W3. Yeah, but to reward those behaviors with that would be great. But the most, and all these things that I've learned, I thought I knew stuff, but that every font has a weight. There's modern fonts now which you can kind of build from. I forget what they're called. There's a name for them, but in most classical font environments, a bold is 50 kilobyte, unbold is 18. So if you're using a load of font sizes, you're using a load of weights. So I saw a designer once that said, "Hey, here's how you lay out a page. So I can lay it out like this, right? And I only use 2 fonts, and by having a good style and design sense of it, or I could lay it out like this, and I've used 6 fonts, So this page is 65 KB or whatever. This image, this little section is 65. This one is 20, So, and then it's a stylistic discussion of which you prefer. He used more spacing instead of bolding, but if you looked at them, you could have arguments to say, well, I prefer that one. But one of them is, 40 KB lighter. So imagine if we did that at scale. Imagine if we thought about all our decisions about, and in a lot of cases, custom fonts have increased by 900% in the last. Most times we can't even see the difference. We can't even see the difference in the process. So, making decisions that matter, that, and being conscious, because we're conscious in our physical world. I think most of us are now, we don't want to waste food. We don't want to waste plastic. We don't, most of us do not get a thrill out of throwing rubbish on the street. Of course, there's always a small percentage that'll do it. But I think there's a consciousness, but we don't have that consciousness in digital. We think digital is a free-for-all, has no consequences. Every photograph, every video, you scale up. I did this analysis. You want to be the most environmentally friendly in communication. What do you think is the most environmentally friendly way to communicate technologically, Stephan? What would you say is the most technologically, so it has the least footprint, the least energy consumption? What communication?
Email.
It's not email, but you're close.
SMS.
SMS. SMS, I think, is something like 100 times less energy intense, because when they designed SMS, they didn't have it was 2G or 1G, or, they had very little bandwidth. And so SMS is extraordinarily efficient. It's extremely efficient in the process. So then it goes to email, then it goes, images like this here. In general, I know, we haven't met in a number of years, but in the, when I would have my standard calls now with people I'm working with all the time, it's either 100% audio or it's video for 2 minutes. So if you do, let's say this lasts an hour, we're on standard definition video. It's about 300 megabytes. if we did this call just with audio, it would be 30 megabytes. And there's actually a number of studies that show for a lot of people, it's less stressful, better communicate. You know, bigger bandwidth is not always better and getting better results, right? So if we did this call with one of those, you remember that old phone system, the old analog phone system?
Yes.
It would be about 3.5 megabytes. So it's actually 8 to 9 times more inefficient to call over the internet by audio than it is with an analog. Is that progress? Like, how is that progress? Because basically we don't care about energy in digital. Artificial intelligence, the amount of consumption, you know, whether it's Bitcoin or blockchain or whatever, you know, when digital systems are being designed, well, I never thought about it. And when I read about it, nobody in AI thinks, a few people think about it basically, you know, the massive consumption. I mean, and it's not good for us either. You know, we're getting AI to do things for us that we would be better and healthier doing for ourselves. Like switching off the light, a bit of exercise. Instead, we get Alexa to do it. I mean, the amount of energy required, it's quite significant. It has to go to a server across 1,000 miles, a lot of stuff happening to get that. There's about 25 steps. Now, at a scale, it's only a tiny bit. But when you're, you know, with 20 million people, and when the set-top boxes or etc. are going to be got rid of after 3 or 4 years, this sort of stuff, you know, spend your own energy. You know, that's why get out on a bicycle. It's not e-cars we need, it's bicycles, it's walking. Good for the city. There are great concepts coming up now, like the 15-minute city. Huge debates about, hey, when we didn't have so many cars, you know, our children could play again in the city. You know, the life and conversation we have designed. There's somebody in the 17th or 18th century said, I can't remember their name at the moment. It could have been Charles Babbage, one of the first developers of computers. He said, but somebody like him said, first we make the tool, then the tool remakes us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is so much of human history, that we actually designed cities for cars, not for people.
Yeah.
You know, we designed people out of the cities, and now we see so many cities trying to come back and create walkable areas, and the concepts of the 15-minute city, that all the key shops, you know, for food and vegetables should be 15 minutes away. Urban gardening, you know, they're using technology to grow stuff in parking, what used to be car parks or whatever. You know, we can use clever technology with lighting and infrared lights and stuff like that. And so we can use technology in clever ways to actually create less overall energy consumption if we do it wisely. But these are the decisions that we're constantly thinking about. How do we create the lowest possible energy footprint, but also the lowest possible waste? And whatever waste we are creating, can it go back into the earth? Can it help other things grow? Or when it goes back into the earth, does it kill other things? We'll have as much plastic in the seas by 2050 as we will have fish. In fact, in studies they show up to a quarter of fish are full of plastic. You know, because when plastic never goes away, it just continuously gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's going into the seas. It's been into small, and the fish are drinking it. It's getting into their glands, and what's happening? We're eating it.
Yeah.
So you know, this world, we got to change it. Yes. We can change it. But it's a radical rethink in marketing, because marketing feeds on that energy saver in us, feeds on our convenience. We will go to hell on the road paved by convenience.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. Two concepts that come to mind that I think we should leave our listener with. One is this concept of externalities, and how externalities are not figured into the equation because someone else is paying for that, or Mother Nature. And that's wrong, and it's very broken, and it's very destructive. And the second is that we're modeling for others. Every time we change a behavior, it's not just the impact of that behavior change directly, it's other people seeing us, like our kids, our family members who watch and perhaps change their behaviors too because they see that. It's so much more about the actions we take than it is the words we say. We could tell them all day, well, do this, and then we're not doing it. We're modeling perhaps something completely opposite, and of course they're not going to take on board what we're saying. They're going to take on board what they see us doing. And so remember, not long ago, maybe a few weeks ago, we were walking along the beach, my wife and my toddler and I, and there was a guy who was picking up trash. He didn't have a job to do that. But when he saw a plastic bottle on the path, he'd pick it up and he'd throw it into the next bin. And he did that a number of times. In retrospect, I wish I would have said something to him like, hey, that's great. I really appreciate you doing that. But I didn't. I just kept walking. And if we're modeling behaviors such as picking up trash for our kids to see, like my little toddler, that's great. But at a minimum, if somebody else is doing it and we don't even acknowledge that person, that's modeling a different kind of behavior, which is not one that I want to show my kids.
Yeah, but I mean, that another great example. And, you know, you can't all, sometimes you're not in, you just don't think of it, you know, that to say it, but you picked up the trash, and you know you'll know the next time to say. And I'd be embarrassed to kind of say, you know, as well. I'd want to say it, but I often wouldn't, you know, say it in the process. But maybe a few practical things as well, you know, in that we could do in our lives. So do you remember I was talking about e-waste? Yeah. E-waste is a real big hidden thing. So the biggest thing we could do personally, and that I've changed my behavior since, is hold on to things. You know, hold on to our, you know, because there's 80% of a smartphone's pollution occurs during its manufacture. So about 60 kb during manufacture, about 60 kilograms of CO2 during manufacture. Typically somewhere around 5 kgs per year of use. So, you know, if you're getting rid of that after 2 years, so if you keep that phone from 5 years instead of 2 years, you're halving its water impact and you're halving its CO2 impact. You know, whenever most of the pollution is in the manufacture, the life becomes extremely important. So whenever there's a huge intensity in the creation of something, then stretching its life becomes very important. Looking, you know, like that client of yours, asking, is this modular? Is it repairable? Can I get this fixed? If enough of us ask these questions, they'll start going back to the manufacturers, brands, and start saying, people are really asking about, you know, Apple has done a load of great things, but the new Apple computers are essentially a brick. They're all soldered essentially. So if it breaks, it breaks. It's totally designed, you know, and the idea of our phones like that, it's a huge issue to change the battery. It shouldn't be. You know, somebody did a study that said, how long should we keep various products for them to have, you know, a kind of as close to a neutral impact material-wise. So a washing machine was about 17 years. So a washing machine, 10 years, we were keeping for 10 years ago, we were keeping for about 10 years instead of 17 years. Bring on the new electronics with digital interface. Now it's 6.5 years. So it's not getting better, it's getting worse, right? A laptop, about 20 years for it to have a typical laptop has about 300 kg of CO2 during manufacture. So if we can really hold on to our electronics and buy electronics from the point of view of longevity, pay that little bit more, for something, but also modularity. Really ask, can I take, like I bought a solid state drive. But because I thought it was faster. But somebody explained to me, yeah, but you can't take it out. So you can't replace that. So it's if you buy it, now maybe that's wrong, maybe it's not wrong, but I never even thought of that idea when I was making the decision that the other sort of drive, well, it's replaceable, whereas a solid state it's embedded, it's soldered into the actual system. So you got a bit of extra speed, which I don't need really. I always bought the fastest computer. And I thought, why do I need the fastest computer? I don't do rocket science. So it's really shocked me in a lot about all the decisions I made, but that we can really think differently and make decisions and get the exact same outcome, and have a computer that's 10 years old. So what? We're doing word processing. So what? Do we really need? Most times we don't. If we could change that thinking, and I know the marketer are going crazy. No, what are you? You're going to lose my job if I can't sell computers every 2 years. So there's going to be, a change. We need to, create a different sort of economy. I don't have the answers to it, but I know that the one that we have is not one that we can sustain. Certainly not one that life on this planet can sustain.
Yeah, it's like a monster that can never be satiated.
It is, yeah, and it grows more hungry. Like like if you look, it's like a hockey stick in the use of material since 1970. It's just like, and you think of, well, as China modernizes, as India, like I was talking to somebody there recently. She was saying, a typical Bangladeshi consumes about 300 kg of oil equivalents a year, energy, in equivalent of, in India it's 600. So if they're in Bangladesh about 300, in India it's 600, the United States 6,000. So, and Europe probably 6,000 as well, so if, other countries become like, and here's another crazy thing I learned as well, because I used to spend loads of time in Scandinavia, really admire the societies, but their energy consumption is huge and their e-waste production is huge because they've created this fantastic technological economy, but their actual impact on the Earth's resources are massive. So, we really need, well, as everyone, avocados during wintertime. We need to think about a lot of these things, about our broad energy impact and as you say, externalities in the process. It's a big mind shift. Is it doable at scale? Well, we have to try.
Yeah, we do. We do. All right. Well, this is definitely food for thought, and not just to then continue with our same behavior patterns, but to actually make some behavior changes, not just ruminate on this and then move on to do our same old. Where do we send our listener to, or our viewer to, in order to start down this path. So they've gotten some inspiration and some difficult to cope with information. What do they do next? Where do we send them to? What website or book or resource?
Well, I've been writing a lot about these things, and the book Worldwide Waste is free to read on my website. So if anyone wants to read, so gerrymcgovern.com for that. There's an excellent tool called the website Carbon Calculator, where you put in a URL and it essentially tells you how much CO2 that page is emitting and how it compares to other websites out there. There's a lot of stuff. If you're in the general web space about sustainable web principles, you just go searching for those. There's a lot of standards. The Whole Grain Digital is the company behind the website Calculator. There's another guy, Tim Frick, in the US, Mighty Bytes. I think they've done a lot of really good work over the years. There's a lot of people. You just need to do a bit of searching for this. And of course, in your other areas of sustainable materials, sustainable farming or whatever, or produce or etc. There's a ton of stuff. There's an interesting organization out there called World Cleanup Day. You're talking about waste that now is in something like 150, 180, at least 150 countries, where they have an annual, clean up waste and rubbish, and they organise in different communities. And they started because of the pandemic, people couldn't gather, so they started a digital cleanup day where they're getting together, over a chat or whatever, to clean up their hard drive or to clean up their images together in groups of people. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in France about sustainable IT and all this the technology area of that. So there is a consciousness, rising around these things. But if you're in the website Carbon Calculator, well worth checking out. Whole Grain Digital and Mighty Bytes and a bunch of other, really good, people. If you search around a bit, and if you want to read up on the book Worldwide Waste, you go to gerrymcgovern.com.
All right. We'll include these links in the show notes for this episode too. Fabulous. Thank you, Gerry. This was great. And thank you for making this a mission for you to help educate people on their impact and what we can do individually and collectively to make a difference and help save this planet.
Thank you, Stephan. Great speaking with you.
Yeah, awesome. So, listener, please think of something that you can do that has an impact and get out there and do it right away, because if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.